Man, it really feels good to be able to have some time to come back and talk about some Twin Peaks. Very busy lately, and that's not going to slow down as we get closer to Christmas. But I'm going to keep trying to make content this year. I'm not sure if I did last year at this time, but I have enough right now that I think, at least try to muster out one video a week, as if that really matters that much to anyone. But I'm just saying, if you are following this, hopefully when you see it, you can expect at least some consistency. All right, that's it for introductory comments. So we get past Agent Cooper's story, which, in my opinion, I would really wish all of Fire Walk with Me had been focused on the federal investigation, really, of the whole Teresa Banks thing. I think it's just absolutely fascinating. And because the Laura stuff doesn't have that Twin Peaks feel, when I was younger, it's just noticeable. It immediately goes to the high school and all that. It just doesn't feel like Twin Peaks to me. It never has. As I said, over time, though, I've accepted this movie for what it is. I don't expect it to feel like Twin Peaks, so it doesn't bother me anymore. When I was younger, oh man, I couldn't stand it. I was just like, it's the music and everything, but it just doesn't feel like Twin Peaks. Now, given that there's a bigger narrative that's been woven from season 3 and everything, I've come to love everything about this movie almost. But I will say, going into the tone, I'd say the tone's the same, but just that shift in story, the shift in focus, is dramatic, and not necessarily in a good way. Now, one of the early scenes, again, I've said in earlier videos that I do think Frost and Lynch intensely watched or read up on season 1 and Fire Walk with Me to inform how they would do season 3. I'm not so sure about season 2 of Twin Peaks. I could be wrong about that, but certainly you see some elements here that they've brought into season 3, and we're going to talk about that. And if you haven't noticed this, or perhaps people have written about it, I'm not sure, there's like one scene that seems to be meaningless when you originally watched this movie, and now has meaning, is when Laura and Donna are laying in Laura's front room daydreaming. Great scene in terms of just kind of interesting. They're both just sitting there looking up, talking, and Donna says, if you were falling through space, she asks, I think she says, would you be stuck in space or something like that? And she says, or would you fall faster and faster? There's two things about this that are really interesting. One for Fire Walk with Me and one for season 3. Now, what does that remind you of? She says, would you fall faster and faster? And Laura says you would fall, I think she says you would fall faster and faster. Well, what is that? Well, that's Agent Cooper in season 3. In season 3, spoilers here, you see this box, this glass box that you're supposed to observe, which could be and probably is some form of allegory for television, right? And there's nothing in the box. And this guy is being paid to watch it. That's his job, is to watch it and record anything he sees is up in this box. And I'm not going to get into the allegory for all, because this just isn't about season 3. But what do we see? We see Agent Cooper falling through space. He's in a void, falling faster and faster, and ends up levitating in this box. It's really interesting. I heard somewhere that they got that was the end of episode 2 of season 3, that got a standing ovation somewhere. It was pretty interesting. It was very David Lynch-ish. It was pretty cool. But anyway, I don't know the whole extent of the meaning of all that, but I thought that was pretty fascinating. But then Laura says something interesting. She says, then you'll burst into flame and the angels won't help you. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit more about angels. I'll probably have a hot take on angels here. But I'll just say, obviously, where do angels really come in Fire Walk with Me? Well, there's two places. Obviously, the very, very end with Laura in the lodge, we see an angel. But, and by the way, they were kind of omitted in season 3. You didn't see anything about angels in season, not that I recall. But maybe there were a little bit. And again, further in the video in the future, we'll discuss that. Very hot take. But just suffice it to say, Laura does say, we do see Ronette, and Ronette is saved by an angel. Now that's really interesting, because what happens with this angel? Well, she's bound, right? Ronette's bound, and then she sees the angel, and it's like the reality's altered. She's no longer bound. We don't see it get cut away. We don't see the binds get cut away or anything. They are, I think the binds are still around her wrists, but they're now loose. And so it's almost like she's, the reality about it's changed. I could be reading into that, but it's just kind of interesting, and it ties into something I'm going to talk about in the future. Now, there is a scene that plays out. I don't know. I think if you're a big fan of Fire Walk with Me, you might disagree with me on this. That on the screen, I don't think it translates well, but the idea is just, I don't have words for it. It's both creepy but profound at the same time. And the idea is this. Laura comes home. She goes up to her room, right? She goes in there, and she has a hiding place for her diary. So she pushes back this chest of drawers. She pulls out the diary. I think she has a cigarette in her mouth. It's just very casual, living her life. And Lynch masterfully directs this scene. He clearly plays out, this is a day in her life. This is just something she's doing. So just like any one of us, you might have a little routine. You go in your room, you do this, and that's a safe place, right? You have little things you do in your life that you can count on. For me, it's probably coffee, right? Wake up, got my cup of coffee. I can count on it. I know what it's going to taste like. This is great. And that's how Laura's played off here, just living her life. That's important, okay? And she lays on her bed, and she opens up her diary, and you hear the sound of pages ripping, and pages are ripped out of her diary. And I'm not sure. I think it would have been better to actually have no sound at all, like reduce all sound, zero sound. Like we don't even hear her gasp when she sees the pages are gone. Because when you hear the pages ripped out, far be it for me to challenge David Lynch on his decisions, especially when it comes to sound department, because he's so good at it. But I felt like the sound of the pages being ripped out was a little bit hand-holdy, like the pages were torn out. And I think it would have been more impactful and would have got more notice for there to be no sound. This is my opinion. But this is significant also in season 3, right? Because these pages that were ripped out, we know there are 2 diaries. Laura takes this diary with the pages ripped out and gives them to Harold, which we see in Fire Walk with Me. So she keeps a second diary, which is the diary that I suppose Agent Cooper finds in the pilot. And it's a fake diary. It's a diary meant to prevent Bob from getting intel on Laura and what Laura knows. But what I want to talk about is this. This ties into why Laura's shown living her life. In Eraserhead, again, I told you, I don't go to other things to try to interpret other works, right? I mean, I do if it really seems to help, but I try not to go off the rails. So I want you to hear me close here. I'm not saying Eraserhead explains this scene. I think the scene explains itself, right? Season 3, we need those diary pages. Those diary pages end up in the sheriff's office and were put there by Leland, apparently. I think that's what Deputy Hawk says in season 3. I could be wrong about that. Although I think it would be more interesting the one-armed man put them there. But whatever. Those pages, and by the way, I should admit that I found out about I don't even remember Hawk saying that. I read that somewhere. And I don't want to make it sound like I did tons of because I really didn't. But I was trying to follow up on an idea that I had. So I did do some research on that. And I think I came across that statement, just for full disclosure. But, and if I could give someone credit for that, I would. But when you're reading tons of stuff and you're looking for something specific, you don't even remember where you read it. But anyway, in Eraserhead, I remember reading about behind the scenes. David Lynch was making these little clouds, like little, I'm going to say, it was dust balls. And he was putting them under the radiator. And somebody on the set, I don't remember who, said, what are you doing? And he said, oh, these are dust bunnies, and they usually collect under the radiator. They would collect in certain places. He's like, but the camera's not going to see that. And he's like, they're in Henry's room or something like that. And then you have the lady in the radiator. This is an idea that I can't speak for anyone else, but I can relate to as when I was a child. This idea, I was alone a lot as a child, and we had, back in the 70s, there were tablecloths were still kind of a big thing, and we had a big dining room table with a tablecloth draped over it. Well, you go underneath that table, and that becomes a whole new world. It was a submarine, it was a base, it was all kinds of stuff. And David Lynch, you look at the woman in the radiator, right? There's kind of that's an Eraserhead if you haven't seen it. It's a world inside of Henry's world. It's just, and this world is just inside his room. Now, C.S. Lewis did this with Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe, and in fact, he wrote about this. I read it myself. I don't remember what book he wrote about it in. It was kind of an autobiography, in a way, pseudo-autobiography or something like that. But it was almost like a pamphlet. It was so short. But he talked about not being able to fully comprehend Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe if you can't imagine being a child and playing in a garden and understanding that garden is a whole nother world. Or your attic is a giant world of its own as a child. He's like, that's the kind of imagination you need. And that's the kind of imagination David Lynch has. And that world, I think for Lynch, is a safe place. It's a place where that world's in your mind and you can go to it. There's dust bunnies under there, right? You know about it. No one else knows about it. And I'm not trying to overinterpret what's happening here. I think it's clear on the screen, but I would just want to add all that for context. Laura is in her room living her life she's secure and used to living. And now when she finds those pages missing, someone has invaded that little world. They're an interloper in the most private of sanctums for a person to have. That is a really terrifying idea. And you can see why I don't like the sound of the pages being ripped out now, because it sounds a little cheesy compared to the dread that I think Laura would feel. This person, why does she keep her diary hidden back there anyway? This is just her place. And given also that this isn't just Leland that found the diary, but Bob, who's an entity that comes into her room. What a terrifying idea. And how many people can really relate to it? I don't really know. Maybe a lot of people can, but man, I just thought it was such a well done scene. It's just classic Lynch doing the great things he does. This is not the hot take I was talking about later. Okay? That'll be in a future video. I have a really hot take. Really hot take. Please be drinking coffee. Just pause this and go get coffee, okay? Because it's Twin Peaks. You drink coffee when you talk about Twin Peaks. I don't even know where to begin on this. I know I don't like to talk about acting. Well, I love to talk about acting. Okay, I love it. But I will say this. When it comes to acting, good or bad, I know I talk about it way more. I act like I don't talk about it and I don't analyze it, but I do because I know a lot of people are interested in it. It doesn't affect my enjoyment of a movie at all. If the acting's really bad, I can only think of one performance, in fact, I've ever seen that was so bad it hurt my enjoyment. And that is, I think it was The Flash. No, not The Flash. Daredevil on Netflix. One actor in that was so bad I actually couldn't enjoy it. Other than that, bad acting doesn't bother me. Great acting doesn't really, in my opinion, enhance it, except when I'm doing something like this where I'm analyzing it. I think Sheryl Lee has a monumental task in this film. I think this was impossible for even the best and most superb actors or actresses to grasp. I don't believe there is an actress alive that could have fully grasped how Laura Palmer should be interpreted by an actress. I think Sheryl Lee must have been exhausted doing this film, because literally every scene, and I have to blame David Lynch for this, is just so intense. It's just so intense. Watch it. Find a scene that's not hyper intense. And not only that, it's so otherworldly and surreal. How was Sheryl Lee supposed to interpret these things? In my opinion, this is the hot take of this. I think Sheryl Lee, it's not her fault, by the way, I think is a little bit overacting. That's just my opinion. I know a lot of people think she deserves Oscars and all kinds of stuff for her performance. Maybe she does. Who am I to say? I think she overacts quite a bit. Doesn't affect my enjoyment. I love the movie regardless. I don't care if her acting was spot on. I just noticed, and I noticed that in the series too. If you watch her as Maddie Ferguson, she overacts a few scenes. And I don't know that that's her fault. I think sometimes Lynch has a way of pushing people there a little bit. And because what are they supposed to do? They really have to trust him on this, right? I mean, they just don't know. And yet I've also heard that they are open to interpret things themselves. Like there's a lot of room and wiggle room for interpretation. So I don't know. I just have to tell you, I feel like a lot of her scenes are overacted. And I don't think it's her fault. That's the really hot take, is that I'm kind of throwing her and Lynch under the bus, and I really like both of them. But and I do think Sheryl Lee's a great actress. I do. And I think she does as good of a job as anyone could. I don't think anyone could have done a better job than her in this. Honestly, that's what I'm saying. She has an impossible task in this film and ends up, I see overacting. I don't see mugging for the camera like oh heck, what's his name? I almost said Will Smith, not Will Smith. Kevin Smith. Kevin Smith mugs. If you ever notice, he'll mug for the camera. But Jack Nicholson is famous for mugging in The Shining, although it actually works. Maybe we'll get around to that sometime. But she never does anything like that. It's real acting. It's there, no question about that. It's just over intense. And this movie must have aged her many years. It's just intense. But anyway, believe me, I appreciate the performance, actually. The effort is there. That's not the problem. The problem is that it's just impossible to, I think, get it down perfect. Okay. So, given what we learned in season 3, given what we learned in Fire Walk with Me, I don't have a ton of time here. I'll keep it brief, and that's unfortunate because there's a lot that could be said about this. What is why is it entitled Fire Walk with Me? And you're getting the impression, I'm getting the impression as I watch this, that fire walking is when someone allows Bob inside. And you see this with Leland when he's at the sheriff's station in season 2, and he says, said, the man used to throw matches at me at Pearl Lakes, a man that lived in a cabin on Pearl Lakes, and he said, he used to flick matches at me and say, do you like to play with fire, little boy? And then Laura one time said to James, do you like to play with fire? Do you want to play with Bob? So I think Fire Walk with Me means fire walking is when Bob's in control of you. And so Mr. C in Twin Peaks Season 3, we're seeing an expose of what firewalking, ultimate firewalking, right? Because this is Cooper's evil doppelganger in addition to being possessed by Bob. Pretty interesting. And so the cosmic battle here that we have to see now in light of Season 3 is that Firewalk with Me is really about Laura's resistance to firewalking. That there was some cosmic battle between whether she would submit to Bob, right, or not. And because she didn't, when she puts the ring on, she defeats Bob. And this means that the ending of Season 3, where all of these elements are reversed, is actually a bad thing. Episode 17, where we see Laura never died, right? All that is reversed. Pete goes out to go fishing. There's no body. It's actually kind of depressing, even though it's, you know what I mean? That scene's really sad, actually. And because it's like, wow, such iconic scenes reversed. Well, it's meant to be, I think. This is conjecture on my part. You have to do that with some of Lynch's work. And it's like, I think some of that, I think Cooper made a mistake. He made a mistake. In his efforts to save Laura, he interrupted that cosmic battle, and that's why you end up with episode 18, where it all has to be played out again in a different way, because he interrupted something he never should have. And finally, I want to get to, since there's just not enough time, so I just want to say, the scene where Laura is in the parking lot of the Double R Diner, and she sees the Mrs. Tremont and his son, and she talks to the son, and he has the mask on. He says he's whispering. He says, "The man behind the mask is under the fan. He's going across your room." Again, this violation of her personal space, like the most intimate of where her imagination lies, her safety place. She goes inside, and in the house, it's a POV from her perspective going through the house. This is, in my opinion, the creepiest scene in all of Twin Peaks. When in a scene I love, oh my goodness, this is probably my all-time favorite David Lynch scene, actually, is behind, is it Twix or I forget the name of it, Twinkies or whatever, the name of the restaurant in Mulholland Drive, where they go behind there and that the thing is behind the restaurant. Great scene. This is creepier than that, because she goes up to her room, opens the door, and all you see, pay close attention, you'll see all she sees is Bob's denim, like part of his denim jacket. We see her screaming, and we see Bob behind her dresser. Man, that scene is so creepy. I'm getting chills just thinking about it. It was just, what an incredible scene. Just Lynch at his best. Anyway, a lot more going to be said about this. I'll be able to do multiple parts. Like and subscribe. Have a good one.